Let's take a look at a program called Candy Factory for your Casablanca video editor. Candy Factory is a program for designing texts, logos, symbols, or backgrounds and turning them into complex three-dimensional objects. The settings in Candy Factory are going to allow you to alter the look or the structure, the pattern and glow of your objects. You can even add light sources and shadows to it as well. Candy Factory does require a base operating system of at least 2.5 or above. And although it can run on 64 megabytes of RAM, if you're able to, I'd recommend at least having 256 megabytes of RAM in there, just because it's a render-intensive program. Let's go take a look at the program by going first into the Edit menu. You're going to need to have some footage preloaded into your machine. Here, we're going to work with some of the animations that we have from our Digital Hotcakes series. Candy Factory does require two scenes to be added to your storyboard. One scene is going to be your video or your background image. The second shot on the storyboard is a scene that's going to have white on black information. In this case, I'm using a scene that had a black video clip from the black scene bin that you can create here with the New button, with a title layered into it, with this white MSUS for Macrosystem US. Candy Factory does give you additional maps or patterns that you can create from your New button in the image pool. Scroll down here just so you can take a look at this. But here's your commonly used pattern generator or image pool. And if you click on Select Pattern, you're going to see when it opens up the image pool, here's some maps that are already here from the Express Maps programs. So you could use Express Maps to create your masks. Or Candy Factory actually has its own series of masks or backgrounds that you can use as well. Here, under the type, we have masks. You can see that some of them are capable to be used in HDV, but these are all sorts of white on black backgrounds that create a mask that you can use to be converted into textures or patterns once we start using Candy Factory. There is even additional monochromatic images or patterns that you can use as well. These are great for filling in your titles with textures, and these could just be used in the regular titler as well if you wanted to. And there's even more images here in the polychromatic choices. You can see all sorts of great textures that you can use as surface characters or actual imagery inside the letters of your texts. If you wanted to build one of those, you would simply hit OK to build that particular white image on black background. Basically, the white information is going to be replaced by patterns or images that you choose in your Candy Factory. We do want to come back up here and choose these two scenes. You can see that the title is 10 seconds and the background is 10 seconds. The Candy Factory program is found over here in Transitions. Alphabetically in the list of transitional effects, you're going to find Candy Factory. You do want to make sure the order on the storyboard is correct here. So your background image does need to be the first scene on the storyboard, and the white and black mask needs to be shot number 2. The first thing you want to do is click on Add to add your transitional Candy Factory effect to the storyboard. Over on the left, you probably also want to click on this box to change your time length, because it defaults to 1 second. In this case, if I want the mask of this title to last the whole length of this background scene, I do want to increase this slider. So now the transitional effect will last 10 seconds. You can use some effects on titlers, so you can have your titles to come fading in or scrolling up with the Candy Factory. In this case, this is just a static title that's been laid onto the black scene, so we can make it a little easier for this demonstration. Down in this section, we have our buttons here that do affect the Candy Factory before you enter in the program. The first refers to background. And the background is asking you, what do you want to have as your background scene behind your mask? This is your background shot up here on the storyboard, shot number 1. If you didn't want to have a background video scene, you can choose this to be a texture, which means the background is going to be something that you load up from the pattern generator or the image pool. There are two other choices down here that are going to directly affect how the Candy Factory renders this mask. The first one is called deinterlace. The deinterlacing is the process of adding two video fields to your video frame. This is going to be used in the case of moving text, like a fading title or a scrolling title, because it may end up jittering in Candy Factory. And if you do see that jitter, you may wish to choose the deinterlace to be on. This will increase the render time of your Candy Factory. Same thing here with calculating. If your title is going to have actual movement in it, then you want to have this set to moving scene. This is going to help give you a more excellent quality, but it'll also increase the rendering time of the Candy Factory effect. For now, I'm going to leave this set to still scene and have the deinterlace off. You can experiment with these on and set to moving when you do try out some moving titles, just to see the differences that it gives you, but remember it's going to increase your rendering time. Let's go ahead and begin looking at the program itself by clicking on the Start Program button. Here we're in the main menu of the Candy Factory program. Let's start over here on the right side to get an idea of what some of these buttons are going to do for you. First of all, we're going to see some repetitious buttons that you've seen before. We got our I button here that just reminds you what version of the software you're working with. And Candy Factory was designed by one of our third-party programmers called Motion Studios. We have the minimizing tool, which will shrink your menu, make it larger or smaller to get out of the way. You'll also have the menu button to move it up or down, or exit out of the program here by clicking on the little hotkey to return back to the transitions menu. You'll notice that anywhere on the screen, if I start right-clicking with my trackball, I don't have to worry about fumbling out of the program. You actually have to tell it you're exiting by left-clicking on this button. In this section here, we have a choice here for default. If you ever make some changes here in Candy Factory and you just want to start right back from the beginning, you can always click on this default button and hit yes to reset it. It's currently in its default setting right now, and this is the generic look of the letters when it converts the mask. Up here on the top right corner, this is actually your frame slider. And you're going to notice as you roll forward, nothing seems to really be happening here. I am specifically looking at this frame mark during our transitional effect. If you remember, it was set to 10 seconds. If this only went to 1 second, then you've probably forgotten to set your transition time. But right now you're not seeing anything change in the background, and that's mainly because back out here, let's return back to the transitions menu, I set the background to texture, again referencing that the background is not actually going to be the video scene, but an image from our image pool. Let's change this to scene so that it now works with the background video scene for us. And back into Start Program. There we now see our background video image, the digital hotcakes. Under Archives, this is something I strongly recommend for those that have been a little curious about the program but don't want to get too detailed into it at first. You can always try it out a little bit by using the Archives button. By clicking on Archives, this is an area you're familiar with using your titles or your colors to save colors or save texts, but it's also going to let you in this program save all your settings for how you design your masks. But one of the nice things that Candy Factory offers is a whole listing of different types of archived settings, preloaded. So let's click on Load. Here you're going to see a large alphabetical list of some preloaded type settings that you can use to start out with your Candy Factory. I'm going to just choose a couple of arbitrarily ones here. You can see we've loaded in some leave choices here. We'll go back to load. We can try doing some strong color ones. Let's come down in here to the smooth blue is a real nice looking letter. This gives us a nice crisp blue look of the letters. We'll come up here and load. Maybe even try some up here into the red metal glow. All sorts of really nice looking reds and metallics. Great way to start out, at least with some kind of setting that you can work with, and begin from there. Because then all these buttons in the middle and all these controls over here can then be manipulated or changed based on the starting point of this loaded archived setting. What we're going to do here is switch back to default. So we'll just switch with what comes as your original setup for it. And now let's start talking about what's going on here in the middle of this particular menu. In the middle, all these controls and settings here are affected by whatever button you choose over on the left side. As you can see, every time I choose one of these modes, the middle section is changing for sliders or settings that directly affect this type of control. In this case, the top left corner one here is called bevel. And this bevel is going to affect the depth of your letter look. It's going to affect that three-dimensional edge. The first part of bevel here is called extent. What extent do you want to affect the edge or the height of the letters here? And as you can see, when I click on width, this is kind of a real-time slider, so you can actually see the changes occurring. So we're changing the width, the actual width here of the bevel. How high do you want the bevel to be? So you can see as I raise and lower the height here, it makes it look like this edge or this bevel is either more raised up or more lowered. Think of it as kind of like a sand dune. We're kind of seeing the top edge of the dune, and these represent that three-dimensional slope or edge alongside it. You can see we're kind of smoothing it out there by using the smooth button, making those edges seem more soft. You can even use this button here called invert mask, which will do the absolute opposite here. It's going to flip it so you see through the letters, and everything that you're manipulating here is actually what you are changing as your mask. But I'm going to leave the invert off, so we're only affecting the letters here, not that background video, or covering up the background video. The other choice here in bevel is called slope. How do we want to affect the slope of this beveled edge? You can see we can start affecting how that slope top edge is working, or how the bottom edge is working. You can see how that's changing. It's great to look in those real thick areas of the letter to see how that's changing. You can also see it over here on the edge of the S as these are raised and lowered for affecting the bottom of the slope or the top of the slope. We have an on-off switch here for carve. Carve is going to give you an idea of getting it as a opposite look. What side of the carve do you want to look at? Just watch this area here. It flips over to the other side. We're just reversing the side of the carve here for this type of bevel. Let's go ahead and adjust a little bit more so we can see more of that bevel here on the letters. There we go. And I'll smooth that out. You can see a lot of experimentation can take place here to get you an overall look that you really want. This button here is called light. This is really neat. It does take some energy on the machine, so you may hear your machine running a little hard, but when you click select position, this is going to allow you to kind of move your lighting source around. Your trackball is essentially becoming a light piece. And as I move it farther away, it creates that shadow distance. You can see here I'm arriving closer to the letters. Now it looks like it's directly on it. When you left click, you set that light source in that area. And this gives you the positions here on an XY kind of graph of where your light is actually located. If you click position reset, it just goes right back to center. Distance is going to kind of create a distance of that light source, making it closer or farther away from your letters. Again, a real-time slider, so you can slide it left or right to adjust, and then left click to set it. This button affects the glow. You can see that glow does have an on-off switch, so we do need to turn it on in order for the glow to have some kind of effect. The glow has two drop-down choices. One is the size and intensity, and the other is the color settings. Size and intensity is basically what it means, is how intense and what is the size of this glow around the letters going to look like. If I raise the size, you can see it becomes more of a strong glow. As I lower it down, that glow becomes more diminished. We can lower the intensity of the glow. We can even choose to have a fall off, so it has more of a fall off the edges when we use our glow. There's also a diffuse button here as well that you can use. It's an on-off switch, and in most cases you're probably not going to use it. Once activated, this is going to actually decrease some of your glow. In some parts, mostly the background here, you'll still see the glow visible, but on the rounded edges it's going to become less visible for you. We'll raise up some of the intensity here a little, and our size. This is going to be difficult to see here. We're going to turn this diffuse back off so we can now see more of that glow. It just became too diffused here. You also have this choice here for color settings. And color settings are going to allow you to have two different types of color choices for your glow. You have a central color and an edge color. I'm going to use a couple of colors that are a little more drastic here. We can see these edges a little better. So we're going to use a central color here so you can see a lot more of that blue along the glow. And we also have a little bit of a yellow edge around it too. You can see those here on the lighter outside edges, more diffused there and on the edge color. If you don't want a glow to be on here, just simply check mark it off. The fourth option up here in the upper quadrant of your options is the one called shadow. Now shadow is pretty self-explanatory. It's going to affect the shadow that casts off these letter edges. Well, for one thing, we need to come back up here into the light source and set the position so we do see there our shadow. And now when I come back here to the shadow settings, now we can increase the shadow intensity or start affecting the smoothness. You can start seeing how those shadows are smoothing out, or create more distance from the shadow casting off of your letters. There is a color box here. If you click on this color box, this allows you to determine the color that you want your shadow to be made up of. You'll also notice there is no alpha slider here. So if you do want to affect how transparent those letters are, you're going to be using this intensity slider. There you can start seeing it's a little more transparent, a little more solid as we raise or lower the intensity. Please note that the shadow is not part of the controls for your alpha changes if you do use a title effect, such as a fading in or out effect. If you do use a fading in or out effect, the shadow may pop on or off. So if you do want to have these titles come on and off the screen with more effects, some characteristics like this shadow won't be manipulated in that manner. So in this case, if I wanted this to be a fading in and out title, I'd probably want to turn the shadow off. But if you're using more of a static image like this, you can turn it on and certainly manipulate your shadow characteristics. Down here in the lower left, we have three more options. You'll also notice that there's a blank row here. There are three more buttons that would appear if we had chosen to keep our background as a texture and not a video image. These three buttons here are going to work the exact same way filling in your letters as they would with your background video. So let's talk about these three buttons over here. The first one down here at the bottom is called Object Texture Settings, or your texture object choices. This is actually referring to what texture is actually going to be inside the letters themselves. As you can see, this is turned off right now. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this on, and we're going to choose to have our texture instead of video, which refers to whatever your video scene was as your background. I'm going to switch this to image. So whatever we choose to be inside these letters is going to be selected from our image pool or our pattern generator. Let's come in here and click Select Image. Up pops our all too familiar image pool or our pattern generator. I'm going to scroll in here and find some kind of obvious type of texture for you so you can definitely see a difference. I'm going to go with these jelly bean choices. So actually our texture inside the letters is going to be these jelly beans. And I'm going to turn the colorize choice off so I keep the original color. I don't wish to use the colorize controls. And I'm going to hit OK. You can now see inside the letters we've started filling it in with jelly beans. Right now we've got our beveled edge on here, so it's kind of difficult to see those jelly beans. So I'm going to come up here and make a couple of changes in order to make it a little more clear to see those jelly beans. The first place I'm going to come up here is to this first button, this orange button. It's basically your shading button or your materials object button. And this is going to not affect the surface or your image surface, but actually the materials shading inside. So here right now the shading is set to normal, and I'm actually going to turn that off and set it to none. There we can see our jelly beans now. Those are filling right inside our letters. We're going to come back to this button in a moment. Let's go back down here to the Textures button. Now of course texture, we chose what kind of information or material or texture do we want inside our letters. And you can use these zoom controls here. As you can see, I'm basically taking the pattern or an image and stretching it out to be larger. If I wanted these patterns to be a little smaller, more stretched down, I can switch these down to a lower setting, and now it appears that I have tons of jelly beans inside these letters. The other option here under Text Object is one called Image Position. Now, image position, think of this as grabbing the whole image here, all these jelly beans, as one big square image, and I'm grabbing it and slightly moving it around. If I was to reach the edge of this background or image, you'd probably see the line or edge where this pattern would get repeated. But it does allow you to kind of grab an image and find a specific area or value within that image that you'd want to set, so maybe the particles or parts of that image fit inside your letters nicely. You can always use the position reset button to start right back from the beginning of where it would be dead center for that pattern, and we're kind of seeing through these letters of that pattern image after it's been sized. If you didn't want this texture object in here, of course you could always just turn it off, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it on. And again, if you did want to change that image and try something else, go back up here under Texture Image and choose Select Image. Let's go back up here to this button here called Materials Object. And again, remember, this is not affecting the surface or the structure, but actually the material itself. What kind of shading or color do we want to put onto the materials in here? Now you can see we have a choice here of shading. Do you want to have any shading at all? Well, here's normal. You can do a metallic shading if you wanted. I'm not really a big fan of that, but it is a choice. You can make the shading become part of what your video is, kind of this hotcakes colorization there. Or you can select a shading from one of your images in the image pool. So you can see this has now become selectable, that I can select a different pattern as a pattern shading on these particular jelly beans. I'm going to leave this set to normal. When we set it to normal, we have our glossiness slider, so we can make these letters with the bevel on top of your jelly beans or your pattern have more of a glossy edge. It's really nice, gives it a really neat lighting effect to help enhance that beveled edge or that three-dimensional edge on top of your letters with your material inside. Also here under shading, you're going to see color settings. And this is what's happening when you're set to normal, is that your normal settings for your color are what you can change here to affect that shading. Let's take a look at that. The first one here is called color, and this is going to be the main base color of your object. Let's change it to something a little more drastic, like blue. Ooh, see how that changed that color here? Now all the shading here has become blue for it. The specular color, this color has an influence that basically affects the light source. So parts that are brighter are going to contain this type of specular color. And white is a really good color here for a nice light lit source here that are hitting your letters. But I'm going to change that as well. I'm just going to use these hotkeys to go for yellow. See how the light spots are now hitting that with this specular color? Ambient color. The ambient color affects more of the dark areas, basically the ones that are not directly hit by the light source. It should probably be more of a dark or even a black type of color here. We're having a hard time seeing our jelly beans anymore though, so I probably want to reduce this type of color. Let's get this more of a kind of a lighter shade. Now we can kind of see our letters a little more because we're not using such a dominant color or base color here to see through the letters. This is giving us a nice shading for a yellow specular light and a darker ambient light on the other parts or curves or darker areas from the light source. Let's talk about one other button here, and this one here is in the middle of the list. This is called your bump map object. For those that are familiar with the bump effect, it's kind of working like that. It's kind of like the watermark choice. This is affecting the surface of your letter choices that you do here, or your object choices. You can see this is also an on-off switch. So if I turn this on, it's going to now give us a bump across the surface of these letters, kind of along our beveled edge. We're now going to kind of put in this textured surface edge alongside it. You can see right now the bump map is set to normal. I'm just going to pop down through each one of these so you can see the differences. You can see the fractal here. This is more of a sharp change with varying sizes. Turbulence, also some sharp changes here. You have your choices for video, and select image. So we can choose actually another image from our image pool, maybe kind of a, let's choose something kind of obvious here. Let's go in and choose like brick. You can see how now we still got jelly beans in there, but the surface area has now been changed into kind of a brick texture. This gives it a really neat looking kind of feel, combining the materials of the jelly beans along with this surface texture from your bump map. You can increase, now you can kind of start seeing some of those bricks a little more, those edges. We can increase the sizes of that bump map by using your zoom controls here. You can also make adjustments to the bump map settings, how high you want your bump map. And we can actually clip the edges of those bumps. Now you can kind of see the jelly beans a little bit more. So if you kind of want to have just a little bit of texture on the edge of those letters, we can raise these up. So that way our materials aren't necessarily completely covered. So we're making adjustments in the bump map settings to that surface texture. And you can also grab the position, just like you do with your materials. I'm kind of moving around the surface, kind of that watermark surface texture is being adjusted here, not the materials or the jelly bean patterns that are inside the letters, if you get the difference there. If you don't want that, you can always just switch this off and go right back to leaving this nice surface kind of texture with the beveling, using our choices here under our shading. Remember, shading here under Objects, Material. Or if you wanted to come back and change what was inside these letters, you can do that by changing it here under the Texture object. And just so you can see the difference, if I come back out of here to the Transitions menu, if I chose my background to Texture and went back into Start Program, see in the background here, that's now a texture instead of your background video. And here are these choices. You can almost see they've kind of shown the object, and then your background kind of represents these images, the little hole in them, kind of representing that your background is what you're affecting. And the same thing applies as what's over here on the left, is that this one here is going to choose what is actually going to be the background image itself. You can see the texture was chosen to be video, but if you wanted it to be the pattern, this looks like a kind of a gradient background pattern. You can change your pattern here as well. So I'm going to choose just something generic. We'll go with the brick wall again. Yeah, there we go. You can see the brick wall, and that looks really neat right there. You can choose also to have a bump map. So if you want to have a texture, this is a little more obvious to you. You can see now we're affecting the surface on top of those bricks. And you can choose to do the same things before, as affect the edges of that surface. You can see all sorts of neat ways to manipulate the surface by stretching or shrinking that surface texture. If you don't want it, you can just turn it off. And then of course we have our materials background. You're seeing that they're calling them all background here on all three of these buttons, and whether or not you want to have any shading on it or not. So if I turn normal on, you can see we've applied some color setting shadings. These are really good settings right here to give you this nice kind of spotlight effect if you wanted a specular color and your color to be kind of grayish. It does a really neat job of kind of giving a three-dimensional texture all around here with your titles and your background. I'm going to come back out here to the Transitions menu and turn that back to Scene. And just to render it, if you're just curious, I'll go ahead and hit Create. And I'll start rendering this on the background video. And again, remember, this is render intensive. We're working on a Reanimate Plus here. So this is going to haul along here and render this title effect for us. And for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to speed up this create process for us. Okay, now that's rendered. And we can hit play to see it. And there's our title on top of our moving animated background. If I wanted to be safe, remember our Scene button allows us to make a layer. I'll use the effect here in this case and hit OK, in case I went back to Start Program and made any changes in here. I'll come back out here, back to the Edit menu, and there is of course our layered title again. Instead of using just regular titles from your titler, you can now take the title as a mask and create even more textures and three-dimensional edges to it. Remember, anything that has this white and black background, kind of a mask image, can be used to create your titles. Here's another example at the very end of another type of title. We got another type of nice image here, kind of a bump map as a texture surface on here, along with a type of pattern inside the letters. You can also use, again, remember, the fading in and out pages. So this one has a title that fades in and out. And if you apply your effect onto it, you can still also use Candy Factory. But notice how that shadow pops in and out. Shadow is not recognized as your effect, as an alpha change. So keep that in mind if you do want to use some kind of moving effect with your titles. There's all sorts of other programs you can use like Akaba or CB Paint or just some of your titles from the titler that allow you to have all sorts of creative, unlimited results to give you really neat patterns and masks and great ways to three-dimensionally enhance your types of videos with your Casablanca video productions.